Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Current History Podcast. Today, I'm excited to have education reform advocate Don Parker on as the first ever guest for a discussion on education policy. We'll be focusing on compulsory education, also known as K through 12, looking at the state of play and proposed reforms, such as school choice. We'll also dive into some of the recent controversies in education, including a recent Supreme Court case on religious charter schools and calls to abolish the Federal Department of Education. With that, let's dive in. Don Parker is a nationally published leader in education and advocate for education reform. He served as district superintendent for an urban charter school system in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a board member of the same district for 15 years, and an advisor to the Oklahoma State Department of Education for 3 state superintendents of instruction. Currently, Don is an instructor in public policy for Harvard's Division of Continuing Education. Prior to his work in education, Don spent 40 years in the technology and banking industries, and half of that time as a senior and executive manager. So, Don, thanks for joining us.
Well, hey, thanks for having me, Ken. And more importantly than that, thank you for taking on what is an incredibly important and complex topic/issue in our country these days. So I appreciate your interest.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So, let's go straight to our opening question, which is, why education? So throughout your career, you've engaged with a variety of social issues. So why have you decided to focus your advocacy efforts over the past 20 years on compulsory education?
Well, in 2005, I relocated to Oklahoma for a professional opportunity. And you're right, I had been engaged in various community investment type activities throughout the course of my career. And so when I got to Oklahoma, one of the things that I did was I surveyed the community to try to understand where the need was and where the need that aligned with my skill set. And it doesn't take you long in Oklahoma to understand that K through 12 education is an issue. Oklahoma has a lot of things that it does well and a lot to be proud of, but like most states, there are some things that it could be better at. And K through 12 education in Oklahoma is typically ranked somewhere in the bottom 3 in the country. And frankly, the country ranks pretty mediocre internationally. So we're talking about a system in Oklahoma that has plenty of opportunity to be improved. And a bad K through 12 system is bad for the economy. It's bad for national security. It's bad for the sustainability of democracy. And it's just morally wrong. It denies young people their shot at the American dream. And so I committed at that point in time to do my part to positively influence the system in Oklahoma. And that eventually led to doing work on education reform nationally. So the answer to your question is, it was where the need was greatest and where I was living at the time that aligned with the skill sets that I brought and I thought I could help.
Yeah, and I know it's very important work. I have some family ties to Oklahoma, so glad you focused your efforts there. Focusing on Oklahoma specifically, what is the state of play for compulsory education there?
Well, let's talk broadly, if you don't mind, at first. And the
Yeah.
simple answer to your question is expensive and underperforming. Since 1970, the cost of our public education system in this country has tripled in inflation-adjusted dollars. Staffing has doubled while performance and enrollment are flat. Think about that. Triple the cost, double the staffing, flat enrollment, and performance on an absolute basis. I say absolute basis because while our performance has been flat, our international peers have been improving. And so we're falling behind internationally. The United States spends about the third most of any developed country on our compulsory education system. In the most recent international assessments, we ranked 28th in math, 12th in science, and 6th in reading. And so the simple answer to your question, Ken, is that our system is expensive and underperforming.
Yes, and that's really concerning given competition now we have in the international arena with China, for example. So with education in the U.S. broadly, what are the challenges as you see them, the main challenges, and what are your proposals to address those?
Yeah, so I wrote a paper on this topic a few years back, and I titled the paper The Innovation Desert, uh, alluding directly to the fact that we deliver compulsory education in largely the same way we did 200 years ago. The system is in desperate need of innovation, but it's dominated by what I describe as innovation's three enemies: government bureaucracy, monopoly, and special interests. Our compulsory education system is funded, mandated, and delivered by a government monopoly that has been captured by special interests. Teachers' unions are the most cited special interest, but there are others. And I want to be careful here, don't get me wrong. Teaching is a heroic profession, and teachers are heroes. They deserve strong representation. But the unions have become self serving as opposed to teacher serving. And they've been successful at getting control of the political processes that govern our system, and they defend the status quo aggressively. The reform arguments fall into really two camps. The traditionalists, and those are people who defend the way we do education today, they argue for more money, more administrators, more teachers, more staff, higher pay, greater benefits, more buildings. This is largely the strategy we've been following for the last 70 years, and it's not worked. Not only is that strategy not practical for many reasons, but statistically you can prove that it's not the answer. For example, New York spends 3 times what Oklahoma spends on its public education system per student and gets about a 1% improvement in test scores. That's not an investment decision that anyone would be willing to make. The reformers are all about school choice, opening the system up to competition. They advocate for charter schools, vouchers, and education savings accounts, funding of religious schools, and promotion of homeschooling. You only have to look at the US higher education system to see why competition and choice is attractive. Our higher education system is the envy of the world, and yet public colleges compete with other public colleges for students, for staff, for research grants, for prestige, and they compete with private colleges as well. And if I move my student from one public college to another, the funding, my tuition dollars, moves immediately with them. And so we have this environment of vigorous competition in higher education, and still 70% of students go to public colleges. So it's not been the death of public colleges by opening up and subjecting them to competition. Um, Competition forces organizations to be efficient and deliver high quality service, or they go out of business. That motivation is lacking in our public K through 12 schools.
Yep. And I like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I like this focus on alternative ways, because for me personally, I understand this because I was homeschooled from fifth grade up until my senior year in college, and then I went to community college for 2 years, and then went to a public university, and I think that path worked just fine. So definitely, we need to think about these alternatives.
Homeschoolers do a great job. Homeschooled kids do very, very well. Today, about 8% of the students in this country are homeschooled. If we made a few policy changes that made it a little easier, that gave some support and help, more parents would be willing to take on the task of homeschooling those kids. If we took the homeschooling percentage in our country from 8%, heck, up to 15%, it would be a tremendous lift in our education system. It's not for everybody, but there's a lot of parents out there who would be capable and would love to homeschool their kids. They just need a little help to make that possible for them. So I'm a big fan of homeschooling.
And I think that's key because, like you said, it's not for everyone, but that's why they're all alternatives, right? So,
yeah, you're right.
You can find what works. So as far as a lot of the reform arguments that we see, where do you fall on those and why?
Yeah. So I believe in markets and I believe in competition, so I would be considered a reformer with a couple of caveats. First, as I said before, teachers and teachers' unions are not the enemy. Nothing is gained and much is lost by demonizing them. They need to be part of the solution. Too many of my reform-minded colleagues make a sport out of insulting teachers and their representatives, and that's just wrong and unhelpful. So I'm a reformer, but that piece of what I see in the reform movement, I'm not a fan of. Second, the problem is too complex and pervasive to be solved with narrow solutions. A charter school law here, a voucher program over there. And although no politician wants to hear it, it won't be fixed before their next election. We have been screwing this up for 50 years. It's going to take 15 things in a decade to make it better. We need to embrace a broad program of reform that, while it can be done in phases, is going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of different levers being pulled. You start by leveling the playing field politically. And by that, I mean on-cycle school board elections with partisan labels. Today, too many districts elect their school boards in an off-cycle. So in Oklahoma, it was done in February, when very few people vote. And even if I wanted to go vote in that off-cycle school board election, when there's no partisan labels, unless I'm willing to do a bunch of research on the individual candidates, I'm not informed enough for who to vote for. What this does is it empowers the special interest. The teachers union basically gets to pick the school board members, and school boards, local school boards, matter. So the first step is to level the playing field politically, on-cycle school board elections with partisan labels, appointed, not elected superintendents of instruction. Next, you level the playing field economically. Equitable funding for all delivery models, including operational and infrastructure funding. I'm talking about not just paying for teachers' salaries and day-to-day operations. Buildings, transportation, and food service infrastructure are a big part of what it takes to level the playing field economically. Then you enable great teaching. And you enable great teaching by abandoning this focus on high-stakes standardized tests, investing in the productivity of teachers, and eliminating obstacles like teacher certification and credential-based pay. And once you do those things, you open the system up to choice, every kind of choice that education entrepreneurs can imagine. Once the field is level, competition will improve efficiency and performance.
Yeah, those are all interesting and valuable solutions. But there's been another topic that has gained steam, and as someone from Texas who grew up in rural part of Texas, south of Dallas, this is very a personal topic to me, which is the rural-urban divide on school choice. And so I sometimes hear resistance to school choice from rural communities who are worried that students, with the means to do so, will go to wealthier communities, go to school there with their tax dollars, and sort of drain funding from rural areas. So my question is, how is the school choice debate different for rural communities?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah.
It's a big issue, and they're right. So when I implement a school choice program in a state, it does divert money from the traditional funding pool to a charter school program or a voucher school program or an education savings account. And choice helps people in urban markets. So in Oklahoma, for example, in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, there were options. Parents could take their kids to a private school, to a charter school, to a religious school. But in the rural communities, there aren't those options. So giving a student in the Oklahoma Panhandle, for example, a voucher or an opportunity to engage in school choice, it doesn't do anything for them. There are no private schools. There are no religious schools. There are no charter schools. So, and we know in our system of government, both nationally at the state level, rural communities have disproportionate influence in the legislature. And so until the reformers come up with an approach that brings advantage to rural communities as well as urban communities, they'll continue to face this significant headwind. The concerns in rural communities about school choice are real, they're legitimate, and the reform movement has not taken up with much enthusiasm finding a solution to help these rural communities.
And I remember, as a brief anecdote, when I was a kid, this was a battle in Texas because rural areas, the school I grew up in, are underfunded because they're mainly funded by property tax revenue, versus, let's say, a Dallas suburb like Plano West, for example, is a real prestigious high school. And so there was what was called a Robin Hood plan, which was, you'd have a pool of money at the state level that would be used to meet the shortfall in the rural districts that was funded by the wealthier districts. And I remember there was a big political back and forth there. So, definitely it's a political hotspot for sure.
It is. Let me clarify a couple things, though, that you said.
Yes.
You said rural schools are underfunded. I don't know if that's true or not. Perhaps the way to say it is they're underfunded for the way we deliver education today. But statistically, if you did the analysis, you would conclude that all of the schools are adequately funded. And we're just not getting the performance out of the model we have today. In education funding, about, in rough numbers, 10% of the funding of a K through 12 system comes from the federal government. The other 90% is typically split between state and local funding. And as you mentioned, the local funding comes from property taxes, and the property values are different in certain neighborhoods versus other neighborhoods. And so that's a disparity. The state funding comes from sales tax. And most states have what they will call an equalization process. They will attempt to level out the economic playing field due to the differences in property values through equalization.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't perfect, and it doesn't fully equal out the funding.
Yep.
But most states attempt to address what you're talking about, the difference in property values, through an equalization process.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a bit more balanced. Yeah. Thanks for that clarity. I learned a lot just from that. So shifting to another topic, which is religious charter schools. So there was a recent Supreme Court ruling, I think 6 months ago or so, but a Supreme Court ruling on religious organizations opening charter schools. So what was the argument there? And in your opinion, are religious charter schools a good idea?
Yeah, so you're right. Actually, it was in Oklahoma. So the Catholic Church applied to open a religious charter school in the state of Oklahoma,
Mm-hmm.
and the Oklahoma courts ruled it unconstitutional. I don't think it is, but they did. They ruled it unconstitutional, and it was appealed to the Supreme Court. Now, the folks proposing this made one critical error, in my opinion. They hired a representative who had a personal relationship with Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court justice. Amy Coney Barrett recused herself on that basis from the Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court then deadlocked. And when the Supreme Court deadlocks, the lower court ruling stands. And so the Oklahoma case did not pass. This will come back. And so the same organizations, they're bringing forward a case for a Jewish charter school. And I believe that when they put the right case in front of the Supreme Court and Justice Barrett does not recuse herself, there's a very good chance that this will get approved. And I think it should. So Catholic schools, for example, do a good job of educating kids. And they do it spending much less than our public schools do. I think we should be in favor of good K through 12 education, and we should be against bad K through 12 education, no matter who does the delivery.
Yep.
And so, people would argue, the argument would be that the Establishment Clause of the Constitution says that we shall not establish a national religion. And what they were thinking of at the time was the Church of England, where you were either a member of the Church of England or you weren't English. We give public money to private colleges through Pell Grants. Notre Dame gets students with Pell Grants. They get research funding. We give public money to preschool through Head Start. Religious organizations deliver some preschool programs, and they get funded through Head Start. Allowing public funds to go to religious schools does not, in my opinion, establish a national religion. And we should be in favor of good education, no matter who delivers it. And that doesn't mean, as I said, that doesn't mean we've declared a national religion.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea, and I think it will come back to the Supreme Court, and I think they will eventually be successful on that front.
I like that analogy you use, analogizing it to colleges, because you mentioned that earlier in our discussion, which is, this is something that's already happening at the college level. Like you said, Notre Dame, a Catholic school, gets federal funding, and they keep lines where students aren't being indoctrinated in a particular religion or viewpoint, and it seems to work pretty well. So
yeah. And we do it in preschool as well with Head Start.
Yeah.
It's only in K through 12 that we've taken this position.
Mm-hmm.
And the K through 12 education, reformers would say the K through 12 system has become more of a jobs program for adults than an education system for kids.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that sentiment.
Yeah. Administrative bloat, hiring. Yeah.
Yes, we are now at a point in this country, believe it or not, of 1-for-1. For every teacher in the K through 12 system in this country, we have a non-teaching position in our education system. 1-to-1. And if you look at, I mentioned earlier how the spending has grown. And if you infer from my data where spending has tripled in inflation-adjusted dollars, staffing has doubled, what that tells you is we're bringing on more high-priced staff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like spending doubled and staffing doubled. Spending tripled and staffing doubled, which means we're bringing on more assistant superintendents and deputy superintendents, and so many more high-paid staff. And we're at 1-to-1, which is a too high of a ratio of administrative overhead to people actually delivering education.
Yeah, that definitely seems out of balance there.
Yeah.
And so our final topic, this seems like one that's been a real hot button issue, especially with the changing administration in Washington, which is abolishing the Department of Education. So there is much discussion these days on abolishing it. I know it's been a talking point on the right for quite a while. So I'm just curious, what is your opinion on that suggestion?
Yeah. So the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, was formed almost 50 years ago. And when it was formed, it had a budget of $14 billion and a mission of improving student outcomes. Today, it spends about $300 billion a year annually, and student outcomes have gone nowhere. In business, where I spent my career, if we commissioned a new unit and gave them a particular mission, and 18 months in they had not made any progress, we'd probably shut it down. You don't get 50 years and show no progress and get to survive. So, the department has not accomplished this mission. It's very expensive. I have no problem eliminating it.
Okay.
Importantly, the U.S. Constitution doesn't even mention education, but it does specifically enumerate the powers of the federal government, and then explicitly says anything not enumerated is the responsibility of the states. So there's not a constitutional basis for the federal government having a role in public education at all. And in spending a significant amount of money, not producing any results, makes it just unnecessary. When I was a district superintendent, the Federal Department of Education was really a non-event. It wasn't something that I would say helped us or hindered us. They sent us some money. At the time, it was 8% of my budget, and they made us fill out a bunch of paperwork.
Mhm.
But other than that, it wasn't a consideration. And so eliminating the department will not have a big impact on schools, but it'll save some money. And so in that case, I think it's okay to do.
Yeah. And I think if you're coming from it, I'm sorry?
Excuse me, I just had something in my throat.
Yeah, it's okay. So if you're coming in from the other side, you could also say, let's say someone wants to continue using federal funding for education to an extent. You could roll that function into a different department or agency. It doesn't need to be, this big administrative entity. Especially with what you're saying, you didn't really interact with them on a personal basis at all. They just basically sent you money. So I don't see why you can't accomplish that another way.
If you want, you would probably just distribute the money to the states.
Yeah.
There's two things that I think we should also touch on while we're here, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
There is now a federal school choice program.
Mhm.
It was approved and signed by the Trump administration. It's being rolled out. States will have to opt into it. And many states already have. I think the latest number I saw was 24. And some will resist. But the way the program works is taxpayers who owe federal tax can donate money to a scholarship granting organization. And the money you donate to the organization is a tax credit, not a tax deduction, a one-for-one tax credit on your federal taxes. So if I owe $1,000 in federal taxes, I can either send that $1,000 to the federal government, or I can donate $1,000 to a local or national, doesn't matter, scholarship granting organization, and then I don't owe any federal tax at all. These scholarship granting organizations will then use the money and give the money out to families to enable them to participate in school choice, to go to a private school, to go to a charter school, to homeschool even. I think what will happen, this is just my own opinion at this point, is a lot of conservative states have opted in. A lot of progressive states will hold off because they are committed to supporting the traditional model of delivering education. People in those progressive states can still donate to these scholarship granting organizations. The scholarships will go to students outside of their state. So I can donate to one, get a credit on my federal taxes, and the money can go to support students in Texas. And I live in Massachusetts these days. So I suspect what will happen is that the federal tax revenue will obviously come down a bit as these tax credits are applied. The federal government will offset the loss in tax revenue by reducing its direct support for K through 12 education. And what that will mean is states that don't opt into the program will end up being net losers because they're losing federal revenue but not getting the benefit of scholarships for their students. And states that opt in will be benefited because they will be losing federal money, but it'll be coming back to them in terms of scholarships that allow students to go to private schools or whatever. So, and that will align very much with the ideology of the current administration in Washington. And so this is just rolling out. I think it will be impactful. I think it will be hard for states not to opt in, but some will resist. And when they resist, it will come with financial implications, negative financial implications for their public education system in their state. I think it's going to be pretty interesting to watch how this plays out.
Yes, definitely.
One other thing I want to mention, if I could, we talk about innovation and reforms. And so I finished up a program in June through Notre Dame, so the Alliance for Catholic Education, of what they call their Reform Leaders Summit. And we spent a year studying reform movements around the country. And then we went to Notre Dame in June and pitched different ideas. The group that I was a part of, I came up with what I thought was a really interesting innovation. And it's simple. Move K through 12 education from ages 5 to 18 to ages 3 to 16. We know that 3 and 4-year-olds learn incredibly fast. Their brains are like sponges.
Yep.
Not the same for 17 and 18-year-olds. I've raised
Yeah.
not the same for 17 and
Yeah,
18-year-olds.
they're a little more stubborn on the uptake.
A little bit, a little bit. It also solves a huge daycare problem for families, right? Daycare is enormously expensive, and for over half the country, it's not available at any price. It's what we would call a daycare desert. It doesn't exist. It it solves a problem for families with unaffordable and unavailable daycare, takes advantage of the early learning years, brings parents back into the workforce sooner. Plenty of families, a parent stays home until the kids are in school full time. Brings parents back into the workforce sooner. Heck, might even encourage families, if I didn't have this issue of highly expensive or unavailable daycare, my family might choose to have more children, which would be a wonderful benefit for the country as well. 17 and 18-year-olds, I can go to community college. I can go to university. I can go to trade school. I can take some time off and do community service. I can go into the workforce. There's all kinds of options for 17 and 18-year-olds that don't exist for 3 and 4-year-olds. But this is an example of an innovation that parents would be excited about. They would love it. The system, it's illegal in all 50 states. So in order to do it, you'd have to go out and change 50 state laws to use the public funding for K-12 education to educate kids younger than the age of 5. It's why I call the system the innovation desert. The simplest ideas. If you and I came up and said, hey, you know what? High school kids are sleep deprived. Let's open a high school, but we're not going to start till 10 a.m. And parents would say, oh my God, I don't have to drag that kid out of bed at 6 a.m. anymore. I picked my grandson up this morning at 5:45 to take him to school. He's in high school. We could never get it done. The system has an incredible ability to resist even the simplest, most common sense change. And that's because the special interests, not just teachers' unions, textbook companies, testing services, curriculum, companies, they have an economic interest in the status quo, and they defend it aggressively.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Great. Okay, Don, thanks for joining us for a very informative and thought-provoking conversation on education that I think is a bit different than what most people might be hearing as far as the perspective on school choice, but definitely valuable. And so I also want to thank my listeners for tuning in for this. You can listen to the Current History Podcast where you get your podcasts, also on YouTube and on Substack. You can subscribe to the Substack at current-history.com, where I have this podcast and also written content. And you can also follow Current History on social media. So again, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Don, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Take care.
Don has also asked me to encourage you to reach out with any comments or feedback. You can reach him at Donald_Parker@fas.harvard.edu. If you also like to learn more about his perspective, you can read his recent piece in the Daily Economy titled Public Education, the Innovation Desert That Leaves a Nation at Risk. You can find that linked here and in the show notes below. Again, thank you for listening.